Hi. My name is Sam Washburn, and for background, I am an H3 hang gliding pilot. I've been flying for this will be my 6th year. I have about 90 hours of air time, and quite a bit of it has been ridge soaring. Ridge soaring is a wonderful way to fly. The reason we love it is because in the right conditions, there's air lift that will lift you up as you're flying above the ridge and will hold you up. And mixed in with that will be thermal. So as the thermal comes through, you can capture a thermal, maybe circle up 1,000 feet, 2,000, 3,000 feet, maybe even get to cloud base, come back down to the level of the ridge, and fly back up again. And you can do this for hours at a time. So it's a great way to just enjoy flying, get a lot of air time, and practice thermaling. So it's particularly good for people who are an H2 or an H3. Great way to improve your skills and get experience. This year, 2020, like everything else, has been a strange year, at least from my perspective, for hang gliding. I have seen 3 accidents where people have flown into a ridge. And I personally had 2 hand of God moments flying close to a ridge. And a good friend of mine, pilot, has also had a hand of God moment flying along a ridge. So I've had time this winter to be thinking about these experiences, and I thought it makes sense to kind of share with the flying community, particularly people who are in the H2, H3 category, kind of what I've learned or concluded about how to mitigate the risks when you are ridge soaring. Because we all want to fly safe, and we all want to take advantage of this wonderful form of flying, but not if we're going to get hurt. So I've got a model here of a ridge. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is that I think our minds tend to simplify things when we imagine them. And I know my mind has done that. So when I've thought about ridge soaring in the past, I've imagined a kind of a perfectly smooth ridge with a perfectly smooth airflow hitting that ridge directly at a 90-degree angle, and then flying, surging up over that ridge, providing beautiful lift and very consistent lift with very little turbulence. But in the Appalachians, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, mountain ranges, that level of perfection is really not there. This example here, this model of a ridge, is kind of a good representation of what ridges really look like. As you can see, this ridge, yeah, it's a ridge, but there's dips in the top, there's notches, there's gaps, there's spines, there's foliage and trees, there would be bare spots. It's not a homogeneous physical feature, it's varied. And all of these features are going to affect the airflow. All of these things influence the turbulence. One other thing that I want to point out also is that rarely do you get the airflow coming exactly into the ridge at 90 degrees. That's what you want perfectly, but generally it's coming in at something of an angle, maybe like this, maybe like that, and it's good enough for ridge soaring. But when it's angled, it's going to be more affected by these terrain variations in the terrain features. It's going to introduce some turbulence, maybe a little bit of tumbling of the air. Let's cut to the chase here. When we're ridge soaring, where is the danger? Okay, pretty much like every kind of flying, the danger is near the terrain. So if you launch and you get some lift and you get up to here, flying back and forth in that nice lift, 500 feet above the ridge or out in front, 500 feet up, you're not in a lot of danger. You've got a huge margin of error between you and the terrain. The danger is when you lose that lift or you hit some sink and now you get down here. You're below the level of the ridge, okay? And you're trying to follow along back and forth in front of the ridge to find that lift and get back up here. Or you may be trying to get a thermal that's going to let you circle up and get way high. But as soon as you sink down into that area below the ridge, that's the danger zone because you're flying close to the terrain. When you're flying close to the terrain, you have less of a margin of error. So, what are the mitigations that H2s and H3s have to think about? One of the most important things, I think, is that since when you're ridge soaring, you're up, flying up here, you're not really in a danger zone, but you sink down, the wind dies down a little bit, so you can't stay up as high. You get down, suddenly you're below the top of the ridge. Now suddenly you're in the danger zone. So you've got to make this mental phase shift, if you will, to recognize, okay, now I'm in a danger zone. Now I've got to fly differently. I can't be looking at the view. I can't be looking at my friend and where's their hang glider. You've got to pay attention to how you're flying that glider. So a couple basic things. If your glider has VG, take the VG off or lower it to 1/4 or less, because you want to be able to turn very quickly and have the glider respond very quickly if anything goes wrong. Secondly, you're below the ridge, do not 360. Okay, prevailing wind is like this. Your 360 isn't going to be round; it's going to be an ellipse like this, and the ridge side of that ellipse might get very close to the ridge because the air is pushing you this way. So no 360s below the ridge. If you find lift and you're below the ridge, do figure eights like this. Figure eights out in front of the ridge. So you're always turning away from the ridge, not turning towards it. So mentally you want to be hyper alert. Third thing is you want to be flying fast. Again, if you're flying fast, your glider is more maneuverable. It's going to respond more quickly. And if you suddenly hit sink, or your airspeed slows down because of thermal activity or turbulent activity in the air, so your airspeed slows down. If you've got good speed with the glider, you're not going to stall, because stalling near the ridge is a recipe for disaster. A few things that can happen when you're flying below the ridge and close to the ridge looking for lift. And this has happened to me. One, I refer to it as the hand of God. You're flying along, some sort of turbulence comes through, God knows what it is, and all of a sudden your glider, instead of flying parallel to the ridge, is now flying directly into the ridge. You've been turned without your own inputs, and you're flying towards the ridge. It's just, and I've had that happen to me, and I've seen it happen to other people. If that happens, what you want to do is initially try to fight the turn to prevent from being turned in. If that's possible, if you can maintain control and start to turn back the other way, you can turn away like this. Pull in as you turn and dive away from the ridge where you get more altitude. Okay. However, sometimes the hand of God or the turbulence is so strong that you can't fight the turn. So it turns you, and you're trying to throw your weight to the right, but something else is lifting. The turbulence is lifting your right wing in this case. And if you realize that you cannot fight the turn and turn back away from the ridge, just pull in and turn back around this way and make the turn all the way around, like almost a 360. But the same thing, just pull in, dive down away from the ridge, and you'll gain altitude because the ridge falls away beneath you. Those hand of God's kinds of scenarios can happen because of turbulence, thermals that are coming through, and or just turbulence that's, if the air is kind of doing like this over the ridge. Another thing to be careful of is, again, when you're flying in the danger zone below the ridge, don't be messing with your instruments. Don't be messing with your harness. Don't be messing with your drinking tube. Keep your hands, on the base tube, and stay alert. That's one of the most important things, because you're going to have to respond extremely quickly if something happens. A half a second here could be the difference between saving a situation or ending up in the trees. And along with this also is one of the key rules or safety items in hang gliding is maintain enough of a margin of error between you and the ridge. Don't get too close. The closer you are to that ridge, the less room you have to maneuver to save yourself, and the less time you have to make those maneuvers. And when I talk about some of the events that have happened to me and to others that I've witnessed this year, you'll see that having an adequate margin of error, or margin of safety, kind of saved me. Let's talk about the events that I witnessed. Last spring at Lookout Mountain Flight Park, I was talking to an H2 on launch. There wasn't many other people around, and he made a comment to me of saying, the last time I launched, I flew out too far away from the ridge, and by the time I turned, I was out of the lift band, and I ended up just having a sled. I'm not going to make that mistake again. So I helped him launch. He took off on the ridge, turned quickly to the south, pretty close to the ridge, and I watched him, and within 50 yards of the ridge, he slowed down dramatically, the glider stalled, and turned into the ridge, and luckily went into some treetops. He and the glider did not make contact with the rock of the ridge. So he was okay. But what I believe happened is that he's flying along like this, and I think a thermal was going up in front of him to the south, and it was probably sucking in air from both directions, which killed his airspeed, because suddenly as he got close to the thermal, the air started moving this way. He dropped below stall speed and stalled, and then the glider did this. So it does happen. West Rutland, Vermont, a month or two later, a gentleman launched into a good cycle. He launched, picked up a thermal, went up like this, and I believe he stalled, turned around, and just came back down to the ridge. Again, he was lucky. He hit the treetops, and what happened to him is he got a branch puncture wound in his thigh. and we took him to the hospital, and he was able to go home that night. But nonetheless, he lost control and didn't have enough of a margin of error to stay out of the trees. Mount Scottney in New Hampshire, and this happened to me. I was flying along back and forth a ridge, which is kind of similar to this. I was out here. I did have a pretty good margin of error, and I'd made several passes back and forth. There were days where there were thermals coming through. There was some ridge lift. Suddenly, some turbulence came up behind me, just flipped me around, so I was going towards the ridge, and put me into about a 90-degree dive towards the ridge. I pulled in, gained speed, and turned away like this. I was able to do that because I was flying with enough room between me and the ridge that I was able to do that. I consider myself fortunate that my training and common sense had me flying with that much margin of error. West Rutland again, this was me. I was flying along in this direction, coming up towards the spine. If you can see the spine here, which was a thermal generator. Typically, thermals would follow that spine. I was flying towards it. Something lifted me, turned me in like this. I tried to fight it, to turn back. I couldn't, so I pulled in and I turned away like that. So I just went with the flow of the turn because I couldn't resist it. It was too strong. I think a thermal had gone up this spine, and it was going to turn me no matter what. Again, I had adequate margin of error, so I didn't have an accident. The last thing I want to talk about is the potential for collisions. If you're ridge soaring on a nice day, there'll be other people up there with you, other gliders. And I've learned that from doing enough of this is that the gliders that you don't see or that you don't notice or that your mind doesn't focus on are the ones that are the most danger to you. If you have 5 gliders within your field of vision flying in different directions and different altitudes, the ones that are not on a parallel path to you will appear to be moving. If you're flying like this and another glider is going like that, you're going to see him. It's going to be obvious to you in your brain that he's passing crossing your path, and another glider is going like that, and another one like that. You're going to see those guys. But a glider that is on the same path as you, whether it's going away from you or coming towards you, does not appear to be moving nearly as much within your field of vision, and because it's going parallel. An event that happened at West Rutland this summer, 2 gliders were in opposite directions, kind of crowding along the ridge, if you will, kind of like this. And they were going in opposite directions, so they were getting closer to each other. And secondly, neither would appear really to be moving much from the point of view of the other because they're almost on parallel tracks. Well, they didn't see each other until the last minute. They turned away, took evasive action, but their wingtips actually touched. So that was a near miss and could have been a real disaster had they reacted maybe a split second later. So these are some of the things that you want to watch out for. As an former H2 and now an H3, I thought that these risk mitigation strategies would be useful to other H2s and H3s because I had not thought very much about these issues and hadn't really been coached on them prior to doing a lot of ridge soaring. So it's been kind of learn as you go. I consider myself lucky in a number of ways. I've been cautious enough to keep enough of a margin of error. But given the number of accidents and near misses that I've seen this year, I realized that not everybody is as lucky or perhaps as cautious. And I hope that this video will keep people flying safely. Thank you.